David walked through the ER doors carrying his son like his life depended on it. Because right now, it did. 3-year-old Mason had been sick before. But not like this. The fever hit hard, his breathing got shallow, and the meds weren't working anymore. David didn't stop at the counter. He just gave the nurse a nod and kept going down the hall toward the pediatric wing. He'd been here too many times to waste time on paperwork. Mason rested his head against David's chest. "Daddy," he whispered. "Are they gonna make me better?" David's voice was tired but steady. "Yeah, buddy, they will." As they turned the corner near the admin wing, something unexpected happened. Mason lifted his head. His eyes locked on something behind the glass wall across the hallway. "That's Mommy," he said. David stopped walking. Behind the glass, a group of people were sitting around a boardroom table. Some kind of meeting. Doctors maybe. Executives. Mason was pointing at a woman standing at the front. She looked sharp, confident. White blouse, navy skirt, hair pulled back. She was leading the meeting, talking, pointing, clearly in charge. David frowned. "That's not Mommy, Mason." Mason didn't look away. "It is. I remember her voice." David turned again, and that's when it hit him. The woman had stopped talking. She was staring straight at them. Her face shifted. Her hands dropped to her sides. She took one step back from the table, then started walking toward the door. Mason clung to David's shirt. The glass door opened, and the woman started walking straight toward them. The door clicked open, and the woman stepped into the hallway. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at them, at David, at Mason, like her brain was trying to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Then she spoke. "David?" His whole body tensed. He hadn't heard that voice in 3 years. Not since she walked away from their apartment, from their baby, from everything. "Sarah," he said quietly. There she was. Clean, professional, expensive everything. Her makeup perfect. Her posture sharp. But her voice, it was shaking. Mason lifted his head off David's shoulder. He looked right at her, and with the calmest little smile he said, "Hi, Mommy." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees almost gave out. David didn't know what to do. He was still trying to figure out if this was really happening. He hadn't seen her face since Mason's first birthday. No texts, no calls, no letters, and now she was standing right in front of him, acting like the past didn't exist. "Mason," she whispered. "Oh my God." Mason reached out one small hand toward her like he wasn't scared at all. Like he knew her. Like he never forgot her. David looked down at his son. "You remember her?" he asked, stunned. Mason nodded. "I told you, Daddy. That's Mommy." Sarah dropped to her knees. She didn't care about the expensive clothes or the boardroom behind her. She reached out to touch her son. And before David could say a word, Sarah started crying. David didn't say anything. He just watched her. Sarah was still kneeling in front of Mason, wiping her tears. She looked like she wanted to say 100 things, but didn't know where to start. Behind her, the glass door of the boardroom slowly closed. One of the men inside leaned over and said something, probably asking if she was okay. She ignored him. That's when David asked the question he'd been holding in his chest since the moment he saw her. "What are you doing here?" Sarah stood up slowly, still holding Mason's tiny hand. She looked right at David. "I work here," she said, then paused. "Actually, I run this place." David blinked. "You're a doctor?" She shook her head. "I'm the CEO. I manage the entire hospital group." He didn't know what to say to that. The same woman who left them 3 years ago, broke, lost, terrified, was now in charge of an entire hospital. "I started a medical consulting company after I left," she added. "It grew faster than I expected. I didn't know this was the hospital you'd come to." David looked down at Mason, then back at her. "And you didn't think to ever check on us?" Sarah opened her mouth, but didn't get the chance to answer. Her eyes dropped to Mason's arm. The 4-line, the hospital bracelet, the pale look on his face. She stepped forward fast. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "Why is he hooked up like that?" David's face changed, and for the first time, she realized something was seriously wrong. David didn't answer right away. He looked at Mason, then back at Sarah. His jaw tightened, like he was holding something in. Finally, he spoke. "He has a rare blood disorder," he said. "We found out 6 months ago." Sarah's eyes widened. "What kind of disorder?" "It affects his immune system. His body doesn't make enough healthy blood cells. He's had fevers like this before, but this one's worse." She stared at Mason's little arm, the bandage where the 4 was taped down, the way he leaned against David like he was too tired to sit up on his own. David continued, "We've been in and out of hospitals almost every week. I had to take unpaid leave from work. Then I had to quit. Insurance only covered the basics. The rest, it's been out of pocket." Sarah swallowed hard. "How have you been managing?" "I'm not," David said. "I maxed out my savings 2 months ago. We've been behind on rent. I sold my truck. I've been taking side jobs when Mason's stable enough to be left with someone." He wasn't trying to guilt her. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just tired of carrying it alone. Sarah didn't say a word. She just kept looking at her son. His face, his tiny hands, his heartbeat on the monitor. Then she looked up. "Can I hold him?" David didn't move. Not right away. He just stood there, trying to decide if he could trust the woman who once walked away, with the one person he couldn't lose. David didn't speak, but after a moment he nodded. He slowly shifted Mason into Sarah's arms. She took him carefully, like she was afraid he might break. But Mason didn't resist. He just rested his head on her shoulder like it was normal, like no time had passed at all. Sarah held him close. Her breathing got shaky. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving him," she said quietly. "Or you." David didn't respond. He just listened. Sarah kept going. "Back then, I felt like I was failing every single day. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't think straight. I had nothing to offer. I thought, maybe you'd be better off without me. That Mason would have a better shot if I just disappeared." David stared at the wall. "You didn't even say goodbye," he said. "I know," she whispered. "I was a coward. I told myself staying away was the best thing I could do. I thought if I just focused on my career, maybe someday I'd be worth something. And then maybe I'd come back." She looked down at Mason. "I didn't expect him to remember me." Mason lifted his head a little. His eyes were heavy, but clear. "I did," he said. "I remember your voice." Sarah's lips trembled. "I'm so sorry, baby." Then Mason asked her the one thing no adult in that hallway was ready for. "Are you going to leave again?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She just held Mason a little tighter and looked at David. "I want to stay," she said quietly. If you're okay with that." David raised his eyebrows. "You want to stay?" She nodded. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but if there's a way I can help, even just be here for him, I want to try." David let out a tired breath. "It's not about what I'm okay with. It's about what he needs." "I think he needs both of us," Sarah said. David didn't reply. He looked at Mason sleeping against her, like he finally felt safe. Truth was, David hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in months. He'd carried everything. Work, bills, medicine, the fear. He didn't trust her. Not fully. But he was also tired of doing this alone. He ran a hand over his face. "I can't do this alone anymore," he finally admitted. Sarah looked like she didn't expect him to say that. David added, "I'm not saying I trust you. Not yet. But if you're serious, you'll show up. Not once. Every day." Sarah nodded. Then, without another word, she shifted Mason gently back into David's arms, pulled out her phone, and stepped a few feet away. David watched her. She wasn't texting. She was calling someone. "This is Sarah Mitchell," she said. "Get Dr. Yates from Pediatric Hematology. I want Mason Carter transferred to his team immediately. No delays. Use my priority file." She hung up and looked at David. "Starting today," she said, "he gets everything." Sarah didn't just say the right things. She showed up. Every day. She was there for every appointment. She sat through every test. She learned how to give Mason his meds. She read to him at night, even when he was too tired to listen. She wasn't trying to take over. She wasn't trying to erase the year she missed. She just started showing up like a mom. David didn't say much. He just watched. At first, he expected her to disappear again. Maybe after a few days. Maybe after the guilt wore off. But she didn't. When Mason had a bad reaction to one of the meds, she was the first to call the nurse. When his fever spiked again, she sat next to his bed all night with a cool cloth on his head. And when he was scared to go into another MRI, she climbed up onto the table and held his hand until they put him under. David had to admit, this wasn't the same woman who walked away. She was trying hard. One night, around 2 a.m., David came back to the hospital room after grabbing coffee. He expected to find Mason asleep and Sarah gone. Instead, he opened the door and froze. She was still there, curled up in the chair beside the bed, her hand on Mason's, eyes closed. She hadn't left at all. Weeks passed, and things settled into something that felt almost normal. David and Sarah didn't talk about the past. Not much, but they stopped fighting it. They both showed up. They took turns. They split the responsibilities. Some days, it was David reading bedtime stories. Other nights, it was Sarah doing puzzles with Mason until he fell asleep. Mason started to stabilize. His energy came back slowly. His appetite returned. He laughed more. And one afternoon during a chemo session, he was sitting between them, one hand in each of theirs, when he looked up and asked it, "Are we a family again?" The room went quiet. Sarah looked at David. David looked down. Nobody answered. Not because they didn't care, but because neither of them knew what family meant anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Not with all the pieces still being picked up. Mason didn't seem upset. He just smiled and leaned against both of them like he already knew the answer in his own way. David finally looked up, and this time, he looked right at Sarah. She was already looking at him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look away. It didn't happen overnight, but then one morning, after another round of blood tests, the doctor walked in with a look David hadn't seen in months. He was smiling. "Mason's in remission," he said. "His numbers are strong." The treatment worked. David felt like the floor dropped out from under him. He just stood there, staring at the chart, waiting for someone to say, "Just kidding," but it never came. Sarah broke first. She covered her face with both hands and let out a laugh that turned into a sob. David just sat down. His legs couldn't hold him anymore. They let Mason ring the victory bell in the hallway that afternoon. Nurses clapped. Doctors high-fived him. Someone brought balloons. Sarah didn't stop there. Within a week, she had launched a foundation to help other single parents pay for specialized care. The first families were already being signed up before Mason's next checkup. David finally started sleeping through the night again. No more alarms. No more emergency drives. Just silence. And peace. He hadn't had peace in a long time. The final treatment came and went. There were no surprises. No setbacks. Just a quiet, happy walk out the hospital doors as the sun was setting. David held Mason's hand. Sarah walked on the other side of him. They didn't say much, just took it all in. Then Mason looked up at both of them and said something that stopped them in their tracks. "See," he said with a grin. "I told you that was Mommy. I never forgot her." Mason's words hung in the air like they were heavier than he realized. "I told you that was Mommy. I never forgot her." Sarah stopped walking. She let go of David's hand, knelt down on the sidewalk, and pulled Mason into her arms. "I never forgot you either," she said. "Not for a single day." David stood there, watching the two of them. There was a time he couldn't imagine this moment. A time he thought Mason would grow up never knowing who she was, never asking about her, maybe even resenting her someday. But none of that happened, because Mason wasn't built for bitterness. He was built for love. And somehow, even with everything that had been broken, he had saved them both. Sarah stood up and took Mason's hand again. He grinned like everything in the world had just been set right. And maybe, in that one small way, it had. They walked together down the sidewalk toward the parking lot. No big talk, no big plans. Just a slow walk forward. David looked at the two of them, and this thought hit him, one he never let himself think before. Maybe she didn't walk away because she didn't love us. Maybe she walked away because she didn't know how.